What if vengeance didn't come with a knife, but with a needle? What if death arrived, not in battle, but in the softness of cotton, the silence of a seam? In 1853, Tennessee, a wealthy family began to die slowly, mysteriously. Their clothes, perfectly sewn, hid something far more sinister. But who was Louisa, the enslaved woman behind the needle? And why did no one see her coming? If you want to follow real stories that defy time and reveal hidden truths, subscribe to the channel now and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our investigations. The humid Tennessee air of midsummer 1853 clings to the thin cotton dresses hanging out to dry in the yard. In the distance, the white-pillared plantation house looms, its windows reflecting the midday sun with cold indifference. Under its roof, a family moves through familiar routines. Help at midday, the mistress with her quiet sip of tea, the master glancing from beneath his brimmed hat. Around them, shadows gather. Shadows they cannot name, cannot see, cannot escape. In the back building, rows of wooden benches hold the enslaved women. Hands busy at needle and thread. Eyes lowered, backs bent under the weight of expectation. Amid them is Louisa. She is slender, graceful in the way she sits. Her fingers move with mechanical precision, guiding fine stitches through linen and silk. Her face is expressionless, yet her eyes, dark pools, reflect more than submission. They hold memory, they hold sorrow, they hold resolve. Louisa's task is intimate. She hems the mistress's gowns, mends tears in the master's vest, embrewers newborn christening gowns, repairs the children's jackets. Each garment passes through her hands, and each stitch is set with care. The family members wear clothes that bear her labor, unaware of the silent calculus behind each thread. It begins quietly, a faint rash on the mistress's wrist, dismissed as heat or insect bite. The children complain of chills, then aches that linger despite rest. The master grows irritable, his eyes clouded with a dull confusion. The family physician is summoned, a punctual man with handwritten ledger notes. He examines the symptoms: nausea, dizziness, skin inflammation, neurological tremors. He prescribes herbal tonics and rest in shaded rooms. He blames the summer fever sweeping through the region, the humidity, or perhaps tainted spring water. No suspicion falls on Louisa. Her hands retreat, resume stitching. Her lips never part. Around day 20, the first death comes. The youngest daughter, pale and still in her bed. No tears announced it, only the hush. Then the matriarch, her hair falling in thin wisps, her skin blistered, her breath slows. The CT physician grows uneasy. His hypothesis shifts from fever to poison. He orders the clothes sealed away, draws samples of fabric for examination. He notes residues, strange oily spots between folds, subtle discoloration of linings. But chemical analysis is rudimentary, inconclusive. There are no forensic labs, only intuition against rumor. The mistress, gasping in delirium, whispers faintly of weightlessness, of fire beneath her skin. The master's appetite vanishes. His unsettled eyes scan servants with equal parts fear and curiosity. Louisa continues, seated at her bench. An external observer sees nothing unusual in her stillness. But rumor slithers through the household, linens that burn flesh, odors like bitter almonds, hushed warnings. Do not wear that satin blouse. The seamstress's quarters are overlooked. No chain binds her to suspicion. She exists within another realm, the space between visibility and invisibility. Her work is her voice, her silence is her power. Once the children lie in quiet coffins, once the widow's mourning falls heavy across the halls, whispers emerge. Did the seamstress slip something in the thread? Could the poison have been infused through accidental carbuncles, hidden stitches, or the tuberous oils she might crush and thread beneath linings. No one saw her prepare anything strange, but every corpse wore her patchwork, her monograms, her lace. Rumors grow in hush. The seamstress was taught by an elder woman. Tales of herbal lore learned in whispered sermons of resistance. Names of plants that kill when pressed to cloth, dosed subtly, slowly over time. No one outside the quarters confirms it. Louisa does not speak. She is described as quiet, Louisa obedient, efficient. Books do not hold her name. Yet every frayed seam, every mend binds the suspicion tighter. In that still heat, the household retreats into fear. Guests are turned away. Sleep comes fitfully, and Louisa stitches on. The house stood still, but it was not peaceful. The air inside grew heavy, layered with unspoken fear and sickness. Servants moved like ghosts, careful not to disturb the silence. The White family withdrew into their rooms. The halls that once rang with forced laughter now echoed with footsteps and coughs. Behind the closed doors, linen sheets were soaked in sweat, and strange lesions appeared on the skin of those who wore the fine garments sewn by Louisa. But the true story began long before the bodies failed. Louisa's past was a patchwork of wounds and whispers. She was born into bondage in North Carolina and sold south at the age of 14. The sale was precipitated by a disciplinary incident, a vague term in the ledger of her previous owner. There were rumors, never confirmed, that a boy who hurt her met an untimely death, convulsing in the fields before he could scream. When Louisa arrived in Tennessee, she was quiet, composed. She showed immediate skill with cloth, and it was that talent that spared her from the fields. She was moved to the seamstress quarters under the direct supervision of the house mistress. What no one knew, what no one wanted to know, was that Louisa carried with her more than a needle. In her first years on the new plantation, she formed a quiet bond with one of the older women, a midwife named Bet. Betta was slow-moving with cataracts over her eyes, but she remembered the names of plants that made men bleed inside. She spoke of the old ways, of roots and saps that carried death in slow trickles. Betta had seen her own children sold off. Her hands trembled when she passed these teachings to Louisa, not from fear, but from age. Under the guise of collecting herbs for dyes and washing, Louisa learned to find the sources of subtle poisons. The White family never questioned her comings and goings. She gathered geeseweed seeds, dried belladonna berries, scraped resin from wild hemlock. Each had its own language. Alone they were dangerous. Combined in exact quantities, infused in fabric linings, they whispered death through the pores of the skin. No one suspected the seamstress. Her role was too mundane, too feminine, too domestic to inspire fear. She stitched in silence. She obeyed. But with each garment she repaired, a decision was made. A thread death here, a hidden fold there, a lining slightly heavier than it needed to be. She worked slowly. Time was on her side. Death did not need to come suddenly. In fact, it was better if it did not. By midsummer, a strange pattern emerged. Servants who touched the family's clothing too often began to show signs of illness. A maid collapsed after wearing a hand-me-down shawl. A stable boy developed ulcers after being instructed to carry a load of freshly laundered coats. The plantation doctor began to suspect environmental toxins, perhaps mold or stagnant water in the old well, but nothing made sense. The symptoms were erratic, some swift, others delayed. The White family dismissed his worries, calling them superstitions. Within the enslaved quarters, whispers traveled differently. They spoke of Louisa's hands as blessed or cursed. Some feared her, kept their distance. Others left small offerings at the threshold of her room. Thread, beads, roots, not gifts, acknowledgments. They knew, or they guessed, but no one spoke openly. The family's decline grew more apparent. Their youngest son, once robust, lost weight rapidly. The master of the house began to hallucinate, screaming at shadows, accusing his own children of betrayal. The mistress kept to her bed, eyes glazed, her breath ragged. Rumors of witchcraft spread beyond the plantation. A traveling preacher was called. He found nothing but sorrow and rot. And Louisa, calm, her fingers always busy. One night, the house cook claimed she saw Louisa speaking to someone who was not there. A shadow by the trees, perhaps Bet's ghost. But when questioned, Louisa only lowered her eyes and resumed her sewing. Her silence was unbroken. The plantation, once proud and thriving, now bore the scent of the plantation decay. And in the heart of it, Louisa swed, as always, each stitch a quiet act of defiance, each hemline a veil between vengeance and invisibility. By late August, the plantation house no longer echoed with the sounds of piano music or idle chatter from the parlor. What remained was the slow, stifled breath of a home suffocating in its own silence. The family's decline had ceased to be a mystery. It had become a certainty. One by one, the members of the household were succumbing to a sickness no doctor could name, no prayer could repel, no servant could ignore. The master of the house, once a pillar of control and cruelty, now wandered the corridors in confusion. His skin had yellowed, eyes sunken and ringed with red. He muttered names under his breath, some living, some long dead, and flinched at the touch of his own clothes. His shirts, laundered and pressed, seemed to itch violently against his flesh. He ripped one off mid-meal, collapsing into a fit of spasms in front of two stunned guests who had ridden in from Alabama. They would not stay the night. His wife, bedridden for weeks, had ceased to recognize her surroundings. Her skin had developed small eruptions that oozed pus and blood when she moved. The house's new physician, brought in by the overseer, suggested arsenic poisoning, though he admitted that it made no sense for it to manifest through the skin. He recommended removing all fabric from the sleeping quarters and initiated fumigations. Yet nothing changed. The children, what remained of them, stayed mostly in their rooms. Their joints ACHD, their gums bled. The family's eldest son, once poised to inherit the estate, refused to leave his bed altogether. When he did, he was incoherent, stammering visions of insects beneath his skin and fire behind his eyes. He clawed at his neck until it bled. A nursemaid who attempted to calm him was struck across the face. She left the same night. The staff moved differently now. Their eyes avoided the family. They communicated in glances. Among themselves they knew something was wrong, something more than fever or illness. Some began refusing to handle the garments. The laundry room, once bustling, was nearly deserted. A few workers were punished for abandoning their posts, but others simply fell ill, their hands covered in strange lesions that refused to heal. Those who touched the clothes too often never seemed to recover. Louisa, however, remained untouched. She neither coughed nor ACHD. Her skin was clear. She kept to her corner, sewing steadily. Her movements were unchanged. She responded to orders, nodded when spoken to, delivered finished garments with precision and calm. But something in her silence had begun to weigh heavier. One of the housemaids, Sarah, confided to another that Louisa had asked for a specific plant from the woods, something not used in dyes. Sarah had brought it to her months earlier. She didn't know why, a bitter-smelling root. At the time, she thought nothing of it. Now she wondered aloud, had it been part of this? Was Louisa using something unnatural? Late one evening, the overseer's daughter was found unconscious on the floor of the parlor. Her skin was flushed, her breath ragged. She had worn a shawl that had just been repaired by Louisa's hand. The overseer, a hard man with a history of cruelty, stormed through the house and tore apart Louisa's quarters. But he found nothing, just spools of thread, needles, folded fabric, nothing that could be held up as evidence. Louisa stood silently, arms at her sides, her expression unreadable. The following morning, he demanded that she be confined, but the master, barely conscious, murmured a refusal. "She's the doctor. Done nothing. Nothing," he repeated, eyes glassy. The house was unraveling, and its master was too far gone to act. That night, a fire broke out in the far shed. It was quickly contained, but the fear had spread. Some believed the land was cursed. Others whispered of spirits, of voodoo, of a silent rebellion being carried out, not with blades or fire, but with thread and cloth. And Louisa still stitched, her hands calm, her eyes steady. No one dared stop her. The plantation had become a place of absences. Windows once flung open to invite breezes now stayed shuttered against imagined threats. Footsteps no longer echoed through the wide halls of the manor, only the occasional shuffle, the hesitant creak of floorboards, and the persistent cough of someone wasting away behind a closed door. It was the arrival of Dr. Albert Greaves, a physician from Charleston with a reputation for treating illnesses the local men feared, that brought a new sense of tension to the household. He was a man of science, of logic, and yet as he moved through the estate, he felt an unease he could not name. His examination began methodically, studying the afflicted, collecting samples, documenting symptoms. But it was the clothing that drew his attention. Every garment worn by the sick showed signs of discoloration along the linings, stitching that appeared slightly stiff, as if something oily had been worked into the thread. A faint, bitter odor clung to the fabric, sharp and unfamiliar. Greaves began to isolate the garments. He requested that none of the household wear clothes prepared by the seamstress until further notice. He spoke to the overseer, then to the house staff. Quietly, he asked questions about the woman in the sewing room, Louisa. How long had she worked here? Had anyone seen her mix anything into her work? No one answered directly. Eyes turned away. But the silence itself spoke volumes. The pressure mounted. Whispers became accusations. The overseer, still smarting from his daughter's collapse, demanded Louisa be brought forward. She stood in the center of the parlor beneath the oil lamp's flicker. Surrounded by sickened eyes and trembling voices, they asked her questions. Did she handle strange substances? Did she poison the fabrics? Who taught her the things she knew? Louisa answered, none of it. She looked past them, past their fear, past their sickness. The master, too weak to rise from his bed, sent word that no action be taken without proof. But proof was a luxury none could find. Greaves collected a sample of the fabric and attempted crude chemical tests. The results were inconclusive. He believed a toxin was present, possibly derived from native plants, but the exact compound eluded him. Still, fear does not wait for certainty. The house staff demanded her punishment. Some proposed whipping, others whispered darker things. Execution, burial alive, salt in the soil. The plantation was no longer ruled by law, but by dread. They called it a trial. But there were no judges, only the overseer, the physician, and the gathering of weakened, frightened souls. Louisa was locked in a storage room beneath the house, the same room where cloth was kept in bales and rats moved unseen through the dark. She did not speak. She did not cry. She remained utterly still. When the cook slipped her food through the door, she reported that Louisa was whispering, not prayers, but names. Names no one recognized, or perhaps they did and would not admit it. Then a turn. A storm swept through the region, a violent, howling night. Lightning struck a tree near the house. In the confusion, the storage door was found open. Louisa was gone. No trail. Louisa was gone. No footprints in the wet soil. No sign of escape. The door had not been broken. Some swore it had never even been locked. The overseer launched a manhunt. Dogs were brought. Marshals contacted, but she had vanished, leaving only fabric scraps and an unfinished garment beside the door. One that bore the monogram of the master, half-stitched, the needle still embedded in the hem. The family continued to weaken. One by one, they fell into silence. Those who survived never returned to health. The plantation was left in disrepair. By winter, it was abandoned. And Louisa, some claimed she drowned in the nearby creek. Others said she escaped north, aided by those who knew what she had done. But among the enslaved who remained in the region, a different story was told of a woman who sowed death not out of hatred but memory. A woman who disappeared not into the woods but into legend. More than a century later, the plantation stands in ruin. The house is half swallowed by ivy, its roof collapsed inward, its walls blackened by time and storms. Tourists rarely come this far into the Tennessee woods. Those who do often turn back at the overgrown road where the trees seem unnaturally close, their branches gnarled like reaching fingers. But every few years, someone finds their way to the remains. Amateur historians, ghost hunters, or the occasional traveler drawn by something they can't quite explain. They come for the story of Louisa, though few know her name. In most retellings, she is called the Seamstress, or the Silent One. Some accounts say she was a witch, that she cursed the family with dark rituals. Others believe she was a martyr, an avenger, a woman who turned her tools of submission into weapons. The truth, if it ever existed, has long since unraveled. Yet, strange things remain. In 1962, a man named Calvin Murdoch purchased the land for timber. While clearing debris from the main house, he discovered a small trunk beneath the floorboards of the sewing room. Inside were scraps of fabric, each neatly folded and labeled with names. Names that matched those listed in the family's burial records. Several of the pieces were stained with dark, oily smudges. One fragment, when handled by a worker, caused a rash that persisted for weeks. Murdoch abandoned the project within the month. In 1985, 2 anthropology students from Nashville visited the site. One of them, Annalise Turner, wrote in her field journal that the ruins felt too quiet, like the house was waiting for something. She described finding sewing needles embedded in the floor, rusted through, but still sharp. That night, she had dreams of a woman sitting in the shadows, her eyes gleaming above a broken sewing table. Annalise never returned. The local archives hold little information. The plantation records were destroyed during the war. Only scattered documents remain. A doctor's journal with entries abruptly ending in 1853. A death ledger with more names than graves. And a single letter from the mistress of the house written in trembling ink. It ends with the words, "She watches while we sleep. I know it now." Among the black communities nearby, oral traditions persist. Elder women speak of a spirit that punishes cruelty slowly, patiently. They call her by no name, but leave spools of thread on their windowsills just in case. No one remembers who first started the custom, only that it is not wise to forget. A local preacher once tried to exorcise the grounds. He lasted 3 days before fleeing in the night. When asked what he saw, he would only say, "Some wounds never close. Some hands never stop sewing." There are still those who believe Louisa never existed, that she was a fiction born from guilt and fear. But they cannot explain the garments. On rare occasions, fragments of 19th century fabric appear at estate sales and antique stores, beautifully stitched, aged, but intact. Several collectors report unease upon handling them. One claimed his fingertips went numb. Another fell ill days after bringing a bonnet home. No scientific explanation has ever held. And so the legend endures. The plantation remains untouched, not out of respect, but out of fear. Trees have overtaken the paths. The foundation buckles in on itself, and no birds nest in the rafters. But, in the sewing room, still faintly visible under layers of dust, is a message scratched into the stone. 5 letters etched with something sharp. Louis. Was it meant to be her name? A warning? A confession? No one knows. But when the wind moves through the house, it sounds like threads slipping through fabric.